Anti-Imperialist America. I believe this is the 28th time I'm coming to you guys live, simultaneously broadcasting on Facebook and YouTube. I can see the comment sections here. If people, while I'm settling in, if anyone, I'm waiting folks to get in here, go ahead and if you're watching this, put a comment in, say where you're coming from. I'm going to open up my Facebook tab so I can see the Facebook comments. Shout out to Red. I can never pronounce that name. Great follower and friend of the show. Thanks for joining us again. Let me open up the Facebook so I can see the Facebook comments as well. Doesn't seem to be loading on the Facebook. Okay. There it goes. I see it. It is there. Okay. Shout out to Darian Holley. North Carolina. I'm also from North Carolina. Darian, nice talking with you. Nice chatting with you. Thanks for joining us live today. All right, I got both of those up. So it looks like I'm getting a lot of new folks from Facebook. I guess people get more interested in politics. That's my normal thing, is to study and do politics. Honestly, the fact that there's an election doesn't really matter to me. I know people are hyped up. It's where they put out the most drama. It's where they put out the most propaganda against the people, is when you choose which of their representatives that are going to oppress us and continue these wars against our brothers and sisters all over the world. We're going to keep the working class down here and steal and destroy and loot the world over. So today's format, I'm going to do a quick intro. We're going to get to the DNC. I watched the DNC. I have a few comments about the DNC. Maybe the end, I'll get in the comments. If people want to put questions, comments, I can read through them. So I'll go into the show. The name of the show is Anti-Imperialist America. The reason why it's called Anti-Imperialist America, because the empire, imperialism, the global economic and political system is the greatest enemy that humanity has ever faced. And this enemy, which is the power, the absolute power of finance capital, and in modern times more linked with the energy sector, big oil. It is these oil banking families and oligarchs that have a crystallization of wealth unknown in human history, an absolute power base where they have control over the lives of almost every member of the human family, has an aspect of their lives, if not almost all of the material conditions, are caused by this global economic system that benefits this few, this minute number, this 0.00001% of the human populace, has almost absolute control over all major, a huge portion of the world's wealth is in the hands of these few oil and banking cartels. And they are ruthless, they're murderous, they're psychopathic. They keep whole regions in poverty and chaos for years to come to continue their profits. I will go over some of the worst war crimes they've done. Under Obama, a Democrat, was destroy Libya. Libya, under Gaddafi, who irrigated the desert, put social programs, invested all over Africa, was destroyed by Obama. And now a slave trader's return, destitution, poverty. What comes when you destroy a country's entire infrastructure, institution? This means no running water. This means disease. This means chaos. This means rape. This means the destroying of potential. If the people in these countries were given basic, adequate rights and resources, they could grow, they could be educated, they could give some of their full power back to the human community, but is being stolen. Their very future is being stolen. Our very future is being stolen. Workers produce all wealth. These are absolute parasites. I quote this repeatedly. Martin Luther King, the greatest purveyor of violence is my own government. It's absolutely true, but it's even worse than that. The greatest enemy of humanity is imperialism, a global economic system that is controlled by the banking and finance capital and Wall Street in London. And they carry out genocide. Basically, any country that comes up to build infrastructure for its people, to use infrastructure, to use its own resources, if they nationalize their oil, if they invest in their community, first, they will be isolated from the international community. Sabotage will be carried out against them. If that doesn't work, outright coups will be attempted against them. And if this doesn't work, outright military intervention will be made. And all of these aspects are not to deliver human rights, they don't give a shit about people. They're not about women's rights. They're not about gay rights. This is all a smokescreen. They're using progressive issues. They're using they're applying to people's best sentiments, social sentiments, to do some of the most disgusting crimes that have ever happened in human existence. And this is the system that Lenin described. And imperialism, the final stage of capitalism. And it has grown and concentrated and crystallized into a point that I don't even think Lenin could imagine. They have absolute control over both political parties in the United States. They own and control the media system here. They control governments all around the world. They back dictators. They use soft power. Hollywood projects soft power. They control the conversation here. The amount of power and control and wealth that has been crystallized in such few hands is unprecedented. They're absolute evil. I'll continue. So a big issue that I've actually done somewhat around, so there's been recent attacks on our post office. The United States Postal Service is one of the best institutions that in the United States. It is one of the most democratic, efficient systems that works for the benefit of the people. Universal service. The ability to send a piece of mail from Alaska to Florida with the same cent for less than 50 cents is absolutely amazing. And if we allow the privatizers to have this, we'll be paying 7, 8, 9, if not hundreds of dollars to do now what we're doing for pennies on the dollar. Because the same thing that's happened to our healthcare system, where we pay more for worse healthcare because the insurance companies steal all our resources, that's what happened to the Postal Service. And it has somewhat to do with Trump. We're we may be having more mail-in ballots, mail-in voting. So Trump is actively working on the longtime privatizers to do brutal attacks on the post office for his own self-interest. But this did not start with Trump. The destruction of the post office has been going on for decades. There was the privatization, the selling off of airplanes and trucks, privatizing the trucks to contractors. This started in the 70s. And then in 2006, the Democrats almost unanimously passed legislation to outright sabotage the post office. In 2006, they made legislation where the post office had to pay retirement 75 years in advance. And they would have been making a profit all this time if it wasn't for that draconian measure that was meant to sabotage the post office. This sounds rather familiar. What they're doing to the post office, they're doing to Venezuela. This is the strat. This is a main strategy of what they do to the enemies, of what the imperialist, this cabal, this small group of oligarchic bankers and oil companies, what they do to any force that goes against their power. They sabotage it. Remember, I said the coups. So in Venezuela, first under Chavez and now under Maduro, they have had amazing programs. They have lifted people out of poverty. They have education and art programs. They've given people housing. And they did this largely through petro-socialism. So this is a competing oil company. Simply by destroying them, they'll make billions simply by raising the oil prices. That's one less producer of oil. That makes them billions. So any bit of sabotage, anything bad that would happen to the country and the people of Venezuela would mean instant profits for the imperialists. So they sabotage. They use forces within. They use the bourgeois elements within. They use some of these private food companies to sabotage and to starve people in Venezuela. And they try to make it, they're basically trying to destroy the system. So they tell some of the middle class people, they flaunt this idea of the American dream. Well, you can have this, that, and this, everything you see on television, all the riches that Americans have, you can have that if you just overthrow your socialist or anti-imperialist government. But even that isn't what happens. When the U.S. destroys a country, it leaves it in utter poverty and chaos. It twists the greed of the middle class. This is the same thing they did to the color revolutions in Eastern Europe. This is the same thing they did to the Soviet Union. This is what they did to Venezuela. This is what they're attempting to do to Venezuela. So they have this right-wing opposition. And then with the government, when Maduro becomes rightfully defensive to stop the terrorists that are being funded from the U.S. government, they call them authoritarian. And then they plot coups, if not outright military interventions against these anti-imperialist countries. That's exactly what they're doing to our post office. There's something, a resource that benefits working people. They want their paws on it. They want to make it. They want to milk money off of us as much as they can. They want to hand the post office to the privatizers. So they enact laws to sabotage it. Just like in Venezuela, they blame socialism for the problems in Venezuela. They blame socialism when it was the U.S. imperialist sabotage that created it. So they're blaming that it's a publicly owned and controlled institution. They're saying because it's a publicly controlled institution, it does not work because of the problems they created, the sabotage they did. Their media source is so big and powerful that this bullshit infiltrate the minds of our neighbors. And you hear it taught back to you. Oh, the post office is corrupt. Oh, social nationalized organizations don't work. Look at how fucked up are. Every time you say I'm in favor of socialism, someone goes Venezuela, and I'm like, yes, Venezuela. Venezuela had great successes. The colectivos in Venezuela, community policing programs, are what Black Lives Matter is advocating. It's what the Panthers and Jersey, New African Black Panther Party, with the community control of the police, they're advocating for the colectivos. And where poor black and brown people have power, control their community, control their resources, they sabotage, oppress, murder, and destroy, and try to take away as much as they can to maintain their profits. Just look at a picture of the Maduro administration. These are indigenous people. These are Afro-indigenous people. And you have these so-called new voices, more brown folks, more immigrant folks, the squad, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You got these people that are supposed to represent poor black and brown communities, viciously attacking and going over, viciously attacking and supporting the coup and violence against the poor black and brown community that has taken power over the police, that is trying to have a better life. Every inch of political space is controlled and infiltrated by this toxin, this evil, this cancer. U.S. imperialism and their propaganda is a great and fierce enemy, is the absolute enemy of all humanity, is the greatest threat to human existence that was ever created. Imperialism, led by U.S. imperialism. What I think we need at this moment in our history, there is no hope. I think on my Facebook you can see there will be no true freedom unless imperialism, enemy number one, is destroyed. I know it was a Black Panther that said this. I'm paraphrasing, but that is absolutely correct. There's no freedom or choice or option or any. If we do not destroy imperialism, we will eke lower and lower and lower. Our conditions are going to get worse. Things are going to become more chaotic. This empire is falling into the abyss. It becomes more violent. It becomes more fascist as it falls. Both parties are enacting fascist policies because it is part of the decaying empire. We need a united front against imperialism. So who are our allies in this united front? The working class here, the exploited here, the oppressed nations, the poor black and brown folks right here need to be anti-imperialist. We need to be reading the Black Agenda Report. We need to understand this system. We need to understand that our struggles for workers' powers, for housing, for dignity, for healthcare, for education are linked, absolute linked with the poorest of poor and the most exploited of exploited all over the world. This is international solidarity. This is a injury to one is an injury to all on an international scale. As long as there is somewhere where they can move jobs to and pay those workers less, we will never have a decent wage. And as long as we allow our government to destroy any people that forms a government that gives their people minimum wages, we will never have our wages rise. So not only are they stealing our health care, education, housing, not only stealing it from us to go and destroy these places and rob them of their future, they're robbing our future to rob the world's future. Because if the world was to build up and trade with each other harmoniously, offer win-win trade, the whole entire world would achieve better material conditions. This force, imperialism, led by U.S. imperialism, is attempting to hold back history. They're trying to stop the advancement of history. They're trying to stop the development of technology and the advancing and expanding of productive capability. They're trying to stop it in its tracks because they're on top and they want to stay on top. So they destroy any threat to their power. So let's talk a little bit about the DNC. I watched all of it. I watched the entire DNC, and I described it as this: their best bishops backing their worst war criminals. So essentially, you have the most shallow pretense of identity politics supporting materially the worst criminals in human history. You have Kamala Harris, the daughter of Jamaican and an Indian immigrant, who became a brutal prosecutor, a maintainer of Jim Crow. Jim Crow is the vast expansion of mass incarceration. Mass incarceration is a tool of maintaining institutional racism and institutional classism. And I mean, it's very simple. It's a workaround of the 13th Amendment. So if they criminalize people, they can legally take away their rights and in economic opportunities, which keeps the poor poor. And Kamala Harris, that was her job. Joe Biden, the crime bill, that was a mass expansion of that programs that Kamala Harris enforced. So you have identity politics, shallow identity politics, backing materially some of the greatest enemies of humanity and horrible tyrants that have ever existed in human history. You have Colin Powell speaking at this event. Colin Powell, the man under the Bush administration that lied for the unjust invasion of Iraq. Joe Biden, the lead Democrat that pushed to go into Iraq When you have him sitting there talking about, when you have a convention trying to elect the lead representative that pushed for the Iraq War, talking about dead veterans, when he's the one that sent them to their death. This is absolute and utter hypocrisy. So, far from very shallow-minded masquerading of identity politics, black, brown, and woman face on the worst war criminals, and system of white supremacy. This is a white supremacist party. This is a white supremacist convention. The ultimate goal of the Democratic Convention is to elect people who will carry out the policies of white supremacy and imperialism. So you have that as well. But you have less veiled threats. I noticed at the Democratic, one of the things I found most troubling about the Democratic National Convention is their common use of foreign tyrants. They said foreign tyrants, to deal with foreign tyrants over and over and over and over again. They also said they got to stop Trump from cozying up to foreign tyrants. Well, who the hell do they mean by tyrants? They are the worst tyrant in all of human existence. They are destroying They destroyed Libya. They are destroying Syria. They are keeping the majority of humanity living on less than $2 a day. They are causing absolute pain, chaos, and destruction. They are the absolute tyrants that have ever existed. Joe Biden is a tyrant, a murderer, and Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Democrats and Republicans together are the worst tyrannical system that has ever existed in human history. So who are they calling tyrants? They are calling their adversaries tyrants. They are calling the enemies of the imperialists, the enemies of the banks and oil companies. That's who they are calling tyrants. And it has nothing to do with human rights. It has nothing to do with homophobia. It has nothing to do with women's rights. It has everything to do that Putin, the leader of Russia, leads a nationalized oil company that is competition to the United States. So they want to destroy him and weaken him. This is why Obama put Nazis, literally Nazis, into power in the Ukraine. Trump was impeached for almost not buying weapons for these Nazis to fight against Russia. Russia, which under Putin in the 90s escaped the absolute pain and misery of the chaos imposed by the neoliberals after the fall of the Soviet Union. It was hell. After the fall of the Soviet Union, neoliberal actors went in and stole everything that wasn't not nailed down. They created prostitution and drug use and chaos. Over 10% of Russia either fled, or was killed or starved to death because of neoliberals. And Putin, by nationalizing the gas and oil, invested back into Russia, kicked out the neoliberals. They're capitalists, but they're firmly part of the anti-imperialist camp. And it is Democrats supporting literally neo-Nazis in Eastern Europe to attack the anti-imperialist country of Russia. So who else are they talking about tyrants? They're talking about Maduro. They're talking about the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. They're talking about China. They're talking about Assad. These are all governments that have tried to use their resources to build up their countries. And they're being attacked because of this, because they threaten the power and the money and the resources of the oil and banking cartels here. That is clean, that is crisp, that is the world global political and economic situation that we call imperialism. So every time they say foreign tyrants at the DNC, that is a threat. That is a threat of coups. That is a threat of sanctions, which starve people, sanctions, which deny people medical equipment and murder people. Every time they say tyrants, it is a threat of a new war and a new invasion that will destroy infrastructure and leave people in poverty, chaos, and violence for decades to come in vast regions of the world. Every time you hear a Democrat say tyrant, that is what they mean. They mean the enemies of US imperialism. And those enemies are not our enemies. These are our allies. If you use the term, an injury to one is an injury to all. Solidarity. What lifts up a fellow worker in any country lifts up the entire working class. Putin, even as a capitalist, lifting up his country, that is an ally, lifting people out of poverty. China, which has planned its economy, lifted millions of people out of poverty. Home ownership, growing middle class. This is an ally. Assad, this is an ally in the fight against the imperialists. This is a class geopolitical struggle. We need a united front against US imperialism. So the enemies we face are the imperialists, both parties, Democrat and Republican. Our allies are the working class here and the working class around the world, and any government that is rising their people out of poverty, building better conditions, and standing up and defying the power of the imperialists, that is our ally. Our allies are these tyrants. Are they tyrants? No. You don't think they don't lie about the human rights abuses? They don't think they control the media system. They control academia. They make up crimes. They said that Gaddafi was giving his soldiers Viagra to rape people as a form of combat. Absolute and utter lie. They said Assad had chemical weapons. They said Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. They lie. They said Saddam, a secular government, was somehow allied with the Taliban. They are lying about every single issue of human rights. They don't give a shit about human rights. They are the absolute enemy to all of humanity. Everything you hear from NPR, PBS, it's all lies. Venezuela is far more democratic than the United States. Even Democracy Now! Will repeat these lies. The so-called War and Peace Report has been on board with the current coup in Belarus. The current color revolution is on board. Democracy Now! Will repeat outright and utter lies against China. Democracy Now! Was part of the buildup to the invasion in Libya. You can trust nothing you hear negative on Western media about anti-imperialist countries. You cannot believe a word of it. You can only trust the material basis of what these countries have done. Millions of people lifted out of poverty, irrigation, building a force counter to our greatest enemy, imperialism, U.S. imperialism, led by both parties, Democrat and Republican alike. So I get a lot of there's been a lot of so-called communists. I think there was one, this Vosh character, that went so far as to say that if Lenin was here today, he would vote for Biden. Now, if you contextualize that with what I just said, that is half of the political force that is the greatest enemy of all humanity. That is the material. That is, I believe, the correct material analysis. This is absolutely ridiculous. You notice how a lot of these people will take aspects of Marx they like. They'll take little aspects of Lenin they like. Oh, Lenin participated in bourgeois. Yes, he did, but that was largely to expose. That was a media front. That was to expose that bourgeois democracy was fundamentally undemocratic. That wasn't to work with the greatest enemies of humanity that had ever existed. No, that is absolutely ridiculous. I notice principled organizations. Organizations have been out in the fight along with the people. Nationalist organizations are not falling for this. They are just the continued, they are basically just a part of the imperialist propaganda at this point. They are being used and manipulated and controlled. Well, and it doesn't even have to be directly. It doesn't have to be directly. It don't have to be directly funded. Just the simple fact the imperialists control the narrative, that we don't truly understand, that most people don't truly understand imperialism, has enabled them to make these false, dangerous verdicts. And they're so they're basically materially um, support for the enemy, support for the imperialists in both parties. Let's see how long we've been going. We've been going about 38 minutes. Uh, Maybe I'll do a few questions before I continue. Um, let's see. Shout out to David Fox. Shout out to Keaton Manfield, Huey Long, Bang 3, Rory McDew, ICM 22, ICM 22. They should thank neoliberalism in Honduras for mass migration, not socialism in Nicaragua. That's absolutely right. The coup in Honduras that happened in 2009, carried out by a Democrat, is what largely caused the mass migration. Um, that is a reason why when Trump um, basically shut down the border. That is why there is mass death camps. These are basically death camps. They're unorganized refugee camps along the border because Trump won't let folks in. And there's COVID outbreaks in here. There's drug trafficking. There's human trafficking. Um, it is absolutely horrible. And it was Obama who pushed the coup, created the conditions to get people, and Trump who has exacerbated this issue. And it's the continued genocide of Native American people. If you look at who is dying on the border, a lot of these people don't even speak Spanish. They speak the native languages of their countries because Native people are in these countries largely controlled and manipulated by U.S. imperialism are some of the poorest people. So these are the people that flee. These are the people that are dying on the border. The border walls and the neoliberal trade deals and coups are the continuation of the genocide of native people on this continent, their own continent. So, and a lot of what this Vosh character was saying was somewhat correct. A lot of internet leftists are just edgy, and they're not trying to appeal to the people. They're trying to build little cliques. It's our deal. We should be realistic. We should be strategic. We should not be dogmatic. Okay? So a lot of people, so Vosh railed against purity, like simply not voting for Democrats out of purity. And I also disagree with that. I think strategic voting is necessary. And this is why, even though I don't agree with all their policies, I will be voting for Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker. Angela Walker, a fellow driver, a fellow truck driver from South Carolina, the state below me. They're only on like 32. I think they're on like 32 out of the 50 states. Don't quote me on that number. So they don't have a lot of power. But this. I'll give this strategically about the Green Party. So Howie Hawkins originally wrote the Green New Deal, which the Democrats have adopted and are pushing. And this is often the case. The stronger a third party is, the more they push the Democrats to the left, which has real implications for the working class. And it actually is usually a dollar to the Green Party does a lot more than just shoving it right to the imperialists' fists. But there are problems with the Green Party. I think they don't have a militant anti-imperialist perspective like myself. I mean, I watch them. They praise the Kurds, which is the safest people to back, that have been opportunistically working with the imperialists to fight against the Assad government. They don't openly form coalitions with other anti-imperialists. So they're a compromise. And that's where I put my line down for compromising. They're the biggest party that has a positive plan that I'm going to vote for. Now, that said, electoral politics is almost useless. Almost useless. I'm not saying don't go it, but I think your money, your effort, your energy is way more better invested. Community organizing, labor organizing. Do what the new African Black Panther Party in Jersey is doing, going out and feeding the community, building groups. I think ideological struggle is important. This show right here, applying to working people, exposing the empire, exposing the Democrats. I believe I'm doing good work. I I work 12 times 5. I work 70, 80-hour weeks. I come home, I put energy into this. I research these topics. I'm constantly keeping up with this, studying theory. I'm putting effort and energy into building and spreading ideology in a democratic way. And all of the stuff I do online, I try to make environments where people who don't usually talk to each other get to talk to each other. I promote civility. I believe I'm doing myself as an individual. I'm trying to help and bring humanity forward. I'm trying to be part of the I believe the third Great Awakening. The first, these are religious movements. The first Great Awakening um, happened right along the time before the American Revolution. The Second Great Awakening, right before the Second American Revolution, which was the Civil War, which was a coalition of abolitionist workers and freed slaves to put down the slave owning aristocracy. Now we need a third Great Awakening. As people are being, as technology has made it where we're no longer necessary on the lines of production, as the capitalists move labor overseas, and we're no longer needed. We're being cast out, and we're in poverty, and we have information technology. So we are breaking with the past conceptions. We're breaking with past ideologies. We're building a new ideology. I believe this is largely a secular Great Awakening. This is a socialist Great Awakening. We're no longer believing the lies of the McCarthy era that has destroyed workers' movements and movements for workers' power. We're no longer believing that. Young folks are believing in socialism and communism more than ever before. This is encouraging. This is the fight. This is the struggle. And there will be a great social awakening, followed by a political revolution where we will destroy the power of the imperialists, end their wars, end their systems of mass incarceration, end their systems of institutional and class oppression. End those and rebuild them. Take control of our resources, plan the economy, and build up a better future. Thank you. All power to the